Hello, everyone, and welcome. Today, I want to share a reflection that has grown out of my own reading and thinking about life's biggest questions. Many of us feel it at one point or another, a restless unease, a whisper that asks, why am I here? What is my purpose? Am I doing the right thing? It's a feeling that can creep into the quiet moments or strike amid success and busyness. Psychologists call it an existential crisis. It can feel like anxiety, like emptiness, like confusion. Rather than fleeing from those feelings, I decided to turn toward them and explore what the great thinkers of the past might have to say to us today. I chose to focus on three voices: Socrates, Friedrich Nietzsche, and Leo Tolstoy, whose works are freely available through Project Gutenberg. And I used them as companions on this journey through questions of meaning and purpose. Let's begin with Socrates, who lived in Athens in the 5th century BCE. We know Socrates through the writings of his student, Plato, because Socrates himself left no texts. In the dialogue called the Apology, Plato presents Socrates standing before a jury of his fellow Athenians, accused of corrupting the youth and dishonoring the gods. Faced with the possibility of execution, Socrates doesn't beg for mercy or renounce his pursuit of truth. Instead, he explains why he has spent his life questioning and dialoguing with others. He says that daily to discourse about virtue is the greatest good for a person, and that the unexamined life is not worth living. For Socrates, purpose is not found in wealth, fame, or power. It comes from examining our beliefs and actions, from asking whether we are acting justly, from caring more about our soul than our possessions. He suggests that living well requires humility, recognizing our ignorance, and courage to stand by what we believe is right, even if it costs us dearly. It's instructive that Socrates views death itself as less frightening than living untruthfully. He compares fleeing from danger by doing wrong to dropping your shield and running from battle. In his view, to die for virtue is preferable to living with a corrupted soul. Socrates' calmness in the face of death and his insistence that no harm can come to a good person because their goodness is internal challenge us to think about what we are willing to stand for. His message invites us to slow down and pay attention to how we live, to ask ourselves whether our daily actions reflect our values, and to accept that truly knowing ourselves is a lifelong process. When we feel lost, his example encourages us to engage in honest dialogue and self-examination rather than chasing external markers of success. Fast forward more than 2,000 years to Friedrich Nietzsche, a 19th century German philosopher whose writing often feels like a blast of cold air. Nietzsche saw that many people of his time no longer believed in the old religious and moral systems that had structured their ancestors' lives. In his famous parable of the death of God, he describes a madman proclaiming that we have killed God by outgrowing the beliefs that once gave us meaning. He doesn't celebrate this as liberation, though. He warns that we risk falling into nihilism, the belief that nothing has meaning. Nietzsche understood that when traditional values lose their grip, people often feel adrift, anxious, and tempted to cling either to new dogmas or to apathy. In his poetic work, Thus Spake Zarathustra, Nietzsche addresses this crisis of meaning through the character of Zarathustra, a sage who descends from his mountain solitude to teach humanity. One of Zarathustra's first discourses describes three metamorphoses of the spirit. The spirit begins as a camel, kneeling down to be loaded with the heavy burdens of duty, tradition, and obligation. The camel represents the person who dutifully carries the commandments and expectations handed down by others. Many of us can relate to this stage. We follow rules and beliefs because we were taught to, even if they weigh us down. In the second metamorphosis, the camel becomes a lion. The lion roars, "I will," in defiance of the great dragon whose shining scales say, "Thou shalt." The dragon represents the external moral codes that claim to hold all values. The lion has enough strength to challenge these inherited commands and asserts the freedom to choose. This is the stage of rebellion, of breaking away from what no longer serves us. But Nietzsche points out that the lion cannot yet create new values. It can only clear space. In the third metamorphosis, the lion becomes a child. The child is not naive, but represents innocence, play, and a creative yes to life. The child is a self-rolling wheel, a new beginning. Having moved beyond the weight of tradition and the rebellion against it, the spirit can now create values out of its own depths. For Nietzsche, the ultimate purpose is not given, but created. Meaning emerges from the act of valuing, of saying yes to life, even with all its suffering. When we feel anxious about purpose, Nietzsche suggests that we ask ourselves whether we are still carrying burdens we don't need to carry, whether we are merely reacting against old rules, or whether we have begun to affirm life and create from our own center. His challenge is radical: to take responsibility for our lives by becoming co-creators of meaning. Our third voice, Leo Tolstoy, was a Russian novelist and moral thinker who, after achieving worldwide fame for works like War and Peace and Anna Karenina, plunged into a profound existential crisis. In his autobiographical essay, A Confession, Tolstoy describes how, in his early 50s, he was tormented by a sense that life was meaningless. Despite his wealth, family, and success, he could not shake the feeling that everything he did would be forgotten, that death would soon erase all his accomplishments, and that there was no reason to do anything. He writes that he had reached a precipice and saw clearly that ahead there was only destruction and death. There was nothing he could hope for that would not end in frustration. He tells a fable about a traveler who, pursued by a beast and threatened by a dragon below, clings to a branch while white and black mice gnaw away at it. The man sees a drop of honey on the branch and licks it, but he can't enjoy it because he knows he will soon fall into the dragon's jaws. This image illustrates Tolstoy's feeling. The pleasures of life, the honey, could no longer distract him from the inevitability of death, the dragon, and the passing of time. The mice made it worse. Tolstoy considered suicide, yet he also saw peasants living hard lives and still finding joy and meaning. He observed that people who held simple, often religious beliefs felt that their lives mattered, even when they had little wealth or fame. Eventually, Tolstoy began to see that meaning doesn't come from intellectual accomplishments or social standing, but from participating in something larger than oneself. Love, compassion, faith, or serving others. He realized that the problem wasn't that life had no meaning, it was that he had been looking in the wrong place. By admitting his ignorance and allowing himself to be guided by the wisdom of ordinary people and spiritual traditions, Tolstoy emerged from his crisis with a renewed sense of purpose. His story reminds us that the existential despair we feel isn't a final verdict. It can be the beginning of a deeper search that leads us to values we might have overlooked. When we weave these three perspectives together, a richer picture emerges. Socrates invites us to examine ourselves and live virtuously, grounding our purpose in the integrity of our soul rather than external success. Nietzsche challenges us to recognize when inherited values no longer serve us, to rebel against the commands that crush our spirit, and to become creators of meaning through a deep, affirmative yes to life. Tolstoy's Crisis shows that worldly achievements alone cannot answer the question of why we live, and that humility and openness to simple truths can restore a sense of meaning. Each thinker navigates the tension between personal freedom and universal truths in different ways. How can these ideas help us with modern existential anxiety? First, they remind us that feeling lost is not a sign of failure. It's part of the human condition. The question, what is my purpose, doesn't have a single answer that works for everyone or lasts forever. Like Socrates, we can cultivate habits of reflection, journaling, deep conversation, meditation, that help us align our actions with our values. We can ask ourselves, not just, what do I want, but what kind of person do I want to become? This shifts the focus from external outcomes to internal character. Second, Nietzsche encourages us to notice when we're living according to shoulds that no longer resonate. Are we pursuing a career or lifestyle because someone said we ought to, or because it truly matters to us? The transformation from camel to lion may be uncomfortable. It involves questioning authority, facing conflict, and letting go of security. But only by passing through this phase can we arrive at the playfulness of the child who creates values. That might mean discovering a passion, cultivating relationships, engaging in activism, or simply appreciating beauty. The key is to affirm life, not to retreat into cynicism. Third, Tolstoy teaches that confronting the reality of death can make our lives more meaningful. When we ignore mortality, we chase pleasures that don't satisfy. When we acknowledge that our time is finite, we might prioritize love, community, and small acts of kindness over ambition and vanity. We might find solace in spiritual practices or nature. Tolstoy's turn toward faith isn't a prescription for everyone, but it shows that meaning can be found in connections that transcend the self. As you listen to these stories, I invite you to consider your own journey. Where are you carrying heavy loads that no longer need to be borne? Where might you need the courage of the lion to say no to expectations that don't fit? Where can you allow yourself to play like a child and say yes to life? And where might humility and openness guide you toward unexpected sources of meaning?